So good morning, Brian. I think it's morning for you too, right?
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, I'm on
Oh,
East Coast time, but yeah,
East
good
Coast
morning.
time, somewhere in the States,
Yeah, I'm in Pennsylvania. You're in Illinois, right?
Illinois.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know much about Pennsylvania, but it's one of the older states. That's all.
Yeah. All right. It's older and
So, some of the people
uh
involved in the founding of this country were in Pennsylvania, right?
right, yeah, I think it's
Yeah,
one of the original 13 colonies, I believe.
yeah.
Yeah,
That, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and
yeah.
a lot of the big meetings were there.
Right, yeah. It used to be the up in Philadelphia was the first, I think it was the first capital of the United States, and then it was kind of interesting history. I went there one
Oh, I
time
didn't
and
know it was
they
the
had
first capital. Mm.
Yeah, I think it was the first capital, and then they had a big yellow fever epidemic in I want to say like the late 18th century, early 19th century, and then so they all got in their horse and buggies or whatever and drove down to New York for a while, and while the Washington D.C. was being completed, and then after that was completed, then they moved to Washington D.C. So yeah, it was I had not known that until recently, but yeah,
Okay.
they have a lot of museums in Philadelphia. If you ever get a chance to go there, it's kind of interesting just to hear some of the stuff that happened in the early stuff we don't worry about today, like tropical diseases killing off legislators. And now we worry a bit more about legislators not having any danger, so that they. But yeah,
Yeah, and sort of cock blocking our attempts related to outbreaks and stuff.
yeah, exactly.
All right, so you're here today because, well, first of all, you found us through another project, not related to this one, really.
That's correct.
KAOS, it's called. We'll just tell people what that is real quick. It's a project trying to improve democracy worldwide, and in short, it's a database of public opinion without systemic control, a worldwide publicly owned institution. I guess that's enough for now. And the reason Uniting the Cults, or I care about it, is I believe it is dealing with, tackling some obstacles that we also face. So that's why I'm helping Brian Charleboy. I think it's, I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't know how to pronounce his name either, but
I don't know
yeah,
how to say it. I had him pronounce it for me a couple times, but I forget.
yeah.
Charleboy or something.
Yeah, some Canadian name I haven't heard before, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So anyway, you had asked me on one of those podcasts, what is Uniting the Cults? I explained a little bit, and then you got interested to come do this podcast with me, and then you also said you want to help. And I'll say the first step to helping is just doing a thing like this, finding out more about this organization.
Right, yeah.
I
Yeah,
think,
I use that in a loose sense. Like I pretty much tell everyone I meet I can help if needed, and whether I can or not depends on my skills and stuff like
of
that.
course, and
But
just to be clear, even like hitting like is a type of help.
yeah,
Sharing something is a type of help.
right,
But what I
yeah.
fear, though, with a lot of people is, maybe they see one of my videos, they like it, they're interested to help in the sense of sharing and all that stuff. But I have a hunch that they don't do much more after that, learning more about the organization or what we're doing or our ideas about how to do things. And so when they try to help further by sharing something or whatever, they can't really say much.
Right, yeah.
I really think the first way of helping is learn more about what the hell we're saying.
Right, yeah. That's kind
Yeah.
of what I've tried to do on the chaos calls. Just kind of spend the first call, not really saying much, but just listening and seeing what
Yeah.
because yeah, I mean, the ultimately, yeah, it's your guys' project. It was conceived by you, and so the
I'm
you
just
know
like you,
the
though, as a
yeah
chaos contributor. I'm no different than you.
yeah
In some sense, we should treat Brian, the founder, as just a chaos contributor. He shouldn't act like a king. He doesn't want to act like a king. He's going to
yeah
listen to us a lot. I mean, granted, if there's a splintering going to happen, then yeah, if you or I leave because we think we got something better, and Brian's not listening to us, then we would splinter, and yeah, we would have chaos would be his. that makes sense. But yeah, we don't want to
Yeah.
splinter. We're trying to avoid that.
Right. Yeah. Nah, he doesn't. You guys don't strike me as that kind of having that kind of pettiness. You just kind of in it for the greater good, right? Rather
It
than
doesn't have to be pettiness type stuff.
Yeah.
They can
Yeah.
people can have legitimate reasons for disagreeing that's not petty, but then
Yeah,
they
that's
fail to come to agreement, and they can do it. And actually a lot of it comes down to the non-zero sum concept. A lot of people think when they do have a major disagreement, they deem it that's not resolvable, so I'm going to stop trying.
right.
And that's the zero sum attitude.
Yeah.
Everything is resolvable given the requisite knowledge, and any of us can gain that knowledge. There's no law of nature preventing us.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
This way that I'm saying it comes from David Deutsch. Do you know that guy?
Yeah, I've read him before. He's kind of like a physicist / philosopher, right? I think I've read a couple of his books, and
his career is physicist, but he's like his professional career. But he's definitely a philosopher. Maybe not a he doesn't teach a philosophy course in a philosophy department in a school, but he wrote a couple philosophy books, and in my understanding, they're the best 2 philosophy books ever made. Partly because they're the newest. I mean, they're not technically the newest. I mean, like before him, I would say the best philosophers was Karl Popper.
Yeah, I've heard you mention him before. I still haven't read a lot of Karl Popper. I think I did read a couple books on David Deutsch maybe 5 years ago, so I'd have to refresh.
The Beginning of Infinity, and the other one, the earlier one, 10 years earlier, was The Fabric of Reality. And and they, I would say they basically say the same thing, but of course the second one's better written, has a few extra themes in there that explains things better. And by the same logic, Deutsch's writing is also just barely a slight improvement over Karl Popper's writings.
Yeah.
But Karl Popper's writings, if you were to put a label on it, is very revolutionary compared to what's before it.
Yeah.
Maybe we could get into that one day. It's probably not relevant.
Yeah. It's kind of like what is the word for it? Scientific positivism and rationalism. I forget all of his ideas, but yeah.
Well, if you want names, Karl Popper's epistemology, he gave it a name, critical rationalism. And it was sort of a name to differentiate itself from earlier things like the concept of rationalism, which is to say we care about reason and we don't care about practical, concrete evidence.
Yeah.
So, anyone doing those kind of things, that doesn't work. And that's why he was trying to explain what was wrong with those kind of conceptions, and many other ones. Like he was explaining why empiricism is wrong. Empiricism is the concept that we gain knowledge by experience or by observation, which is incorrect. But anyway, again, we won't go into details on that in this episode.
Okay, all right.
So you want to learn more about the organization. So let me say a little bit, and this partly is not just to tell you, but to tell the audience. Let me give a tiny rundown. So the goal is to rid the world of apostasy laws. The major one being the death penalty for apostasy. But also that's connected to blasphemy laws, because a lot of times when people end up breaking a blasphemy law, that gets him very close to also being deemed breaking the apostasy law. So they're really mixed in the same thing, and I think there's a lot of fudging going on just to be able to do that. We don't have apostasy laws; we only have blasphemy laws. But if the end result is the same, then no, it's the same shit.
Yeah.
And I see. Well, let me say this: my vision is of a world where people recognize love as the goal and rationality as the method to achieve it.
Yeah.
That's sort of a marketing statement. It's trying to say, look, it's not just rationality. We have to care about human beings.
Yeah.
We have to do things like don't be a jerk.
Yeah.
And from the KAOS conversations, and I learned a new term from them, I mean, KAOS didn't invent it, but it's from their world that they're talking about it. Cognitive empathy, which is to say, empathy is, the first time I heard the word empathy, it was presented as, when somebody feels bad in front of you, you feel bad also. First of all, there needs to be knowledge there. Like, you have to understand what their problem is, why they're even suffering in the first place. That is the only way, that's the main way, or maybe you say appropriate way to empathize. And then let's say feelings could happen too, but the main thing should be the knowledge. And that's why they have this term now, cognitive empathy, is to focus on the understanding part and not focus on the I also feel bad part.
Yeah.
How did I bring that up? Love and reason. And notice I put love in front.
Yeah.
If rationality is your goal, which I know of a philosopher who kind of talks that way. I'm not going to name who. But what you'll see is he's a jerk to everyone.
Yeah. He's
a jerk to everyone. Everyone leaves his group because he's being a jerk to everyone. We could talk about why he's that way.
What you're saying is he proclaims the goal of being loving and understanding to people, but he doesn't really
he never actually says loving or empathy or anything like that. Okay. He says his goal is, let's make rationality better. Let's all be rational. But then he's a jerk to everyone. Look,
I see.
Imagine a scientist, let's say like an Einstein. Suppose Einstein was a dickhead to everyone around him. He wouldn't even have been able to create his theory. If you talk to some people that know the history, he got a lot of help from a lot of people, a lot of other scientists, mathematicians, helped him develop his theory. Granted, he was the main one. He had a lot of helpers. If he was a jerk to everyone, they would not have helped him.
Right, yeah.
And then, of course, if you look at some of the writings of Einstein, other than his physics, he's definitely a humanitarian. He cares about love.
Yeah.
He helped on the Manhattan Project to make the nuclear bomb. And then afterwards, he's like, I'm not so sure we should have done this.
Yeah.
And he's thinking in terms of love. Maybe not that term exactly, compassion. What is it going to take to advance humans going forward, and that it needs to factor in things like, what does it mean to be human, and what do we need to thrive, and imagine Einstein as a scientist, what he needed to thrive or whatever. If he was being a jerk to everyone and no one helped him, he wouldn't have become a great scientist. He wouldn't have created what he did. He'd be a nobody in history now. Love was part of it.
Have you seen the relatively new movie, the American Prometheus, Oppenheimer movie? That was
I haven't, but I want to bad.
That was kind of interesting depiction of Einstein. And he doesn't play I wouldn't say he plays a very prominent role in the movie. He's kind of like an aside to the focus is mostly on Oppenheimer and the scientist he worked closely with, but it was kind of different.
As far as I know, he didn't really help much aside from
theory.
He was the one who had the theory that led the Manhattan Project to do the necessary engineering to make it happen.
Yeah, but he does appear briefly in several scenes, and it's kind of a portrayal of him that you typically don't see. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah, but.
So my next point to say is, how do we actually achieve this goal? And the next thing I say, it's kind of common knowledge, but I'm drawing from another intellectual, Ellie Goldratt. Ellie Goldratt was a physicist who then became a business management guru. For like 4 decades, he was working on business management, and a ton of big companies got his help and majorly improved their companies. And one of the kind of things he says is, when you have a goal, you want to look at what is the biggest obstacle to reaching the goal. What's stopping you from getting there. And maybe there's 1,000 things, but 999 are small. And if you were to fix them, they would only make a small improvement or almost negligible, compared to the one big one, if you fixed it, would make a large improvement. I would call that an obstacle, the only obstacle, the main obstacle.
Yeah.
So we need to think about what's the main obstacle or main obstacles to reaching our goal of getting rid of the death penalty for apostasy worldwide. And I believe now I'm going to bring in Richard Feynman. I believe he said what the main obstacle is. Now, of course, he didn't talk about the apostasy laws. What he was talking about was advancing human knowledge in general. He said this in his 1974 Caltech commencement speech. He basically said one point. He spent an hour talking about one point. We live in the scientific age, but we don't think scientifically. Yeah. That is the obstacle, the main obstacle to making the most human progress.
Yeah.
And it's the same obstacle to the one smaller goal of the apostasy laws, getting rid of them. And it's the same obstacle to so many other big goals, which is why I care about KAOS.
Right.
Increasing democracy.
And this is the thing you referenced before, where he talked a lot about cargo cult science, right? Where it kind of bears a superficial resemblance to scientific thinking, but a lot of scientists don't actually employ it. They just kind of have a cheap copy of.
Now to put it in context, imagine all the news reports we see that are really just propaganda. Yeah. They look like they're doing truth seeking. It's a news report by a news agency who claims to be doing truth seeking.
Mm-hmm.
But they're actually repeating propaganda and they know it. Maybe not the guy saying it, but the people above them.
Right. Yeah.
So it's the same kind of thing. It's pseudoscience. We are living in the scientific age in the sense that we have tons of technology, like allowing us to do this podcast right now. But there's so many areas in our world, so many areas where that kind of thing isn't happening, and it's propaganda instead.
Yeah.
So I believe.
Yeah, I wholly agree with that. Yep.
I believe the main obstacles to reaching our goal are to do with truth seeking and propaganda. Now that gets into a lot of things. So one example thing is, like, for example, Facebook silences any opinions that they deem Islamophobic, which really they use that label on anyone criticizing Islam or the actions of Muslims. Well, that's not going to help with our goal. And of course, Facebook's doing that to lots of other topics, not just to the ex-Muslim issues. So for example, I don't know. I don't pay attention too much about other issues a lot, but let's say there's propaganda around vaccines on one side or the other. Facebook is choosing which one it's going to hide,
right?
Thereby, causing a scenario where it's keeping people stupid, keeping people ignorant.
Yeah.
Which again is why we need something like KAOS. KAOS, the idea of it is to have a database of public opinion, like a Facebook, like a Twitter, where we're not censoring the ideas. And just to throw Twitter under the bus for the moment, Elon Musk said recently, maybe a couple months ago or something, I think after he became, part of the government in the US, where he said, we care about free speech. We're doing free speech. But they're silencing pro-Palestinian content. Now, even if pro-Palestinian content is propaganda, let's say it is, for argument's sake, it still shouldn't be censored. For one thing, the person that's doing the censoring is not infallible. They don't know for a fact, 100% certainty, that what they're looking at is propaganda. So you shouldn't be silencing or censoring. And what should be happening instead is open it up to criticism.
Yeah.
In any case, that's the way it's going to get solved anyway. That's the way people are going to be persuaded. We shouldn't be banning books like Quran or Mein Kampf. We should leave them up. People say, what's the quickest way to become an ex-Christian? Read the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
With a critical mind is the obvious point there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also really disturbing. Recently, I've read people that say there is a Mark Twain, who is one of my favorite writers. He has a lot of books that are controversial today because they have what's called racial stereotypes and controversial opinions towards other non-Caucasian, non-white races, and controversial opinions towards women and things like that. And so they're actually rewriting his books without, he's dead, so he doesn't have any input, obviously. And then they're putting it on the shelf as if it were the original copy of the book, that's a whole other level of insanity, right? Because you're not even letting the famous author, speak for himself anymore, right? Which actually has been historically a problem with the Bible as well. That a new sect of religion will form, and then they will basically rewrite the Bible to fit their narrative and take out books and insert books and all this.
It's a problem. It's a common problem with cults where there's splintering happening, and the splintering happens because one of the followers disagrees with the leader, and that disagreement doesn't get resolved. Besides the generic way of they leave each other.
Yeah.
And then that other follower decides to start his own group and siphons half the followers from the original one. I mean, that's the story of all the religions that's ever been happening. I wonder if there's a religion, like, I don't know too much about Buddhism, but I wonder if there's a thing like Buddhism that, because of the way it is, and again, I don't know much about it, that it doesn't cause splintering.
Yeah, I think Buddhism, well, I mean, some of the Eastern religions, I don't know that much about it either, but I did take a class about world religions one time, and they are much older, and they seem to have splintered less over the years, but there are still different sects of Buddhism. There's like Tibetan Buddhism, Zen Buddhism.
I wonder what those differences are, though. I wonder if the differences are more cosmetic rather than
I think so.
Ideological.
Yeah. I think so. That's the way I get it. It's like it's kind of like Hinduism. It goes under a big umbrella of Hinduism, but really the religion itself kind of prides itself on being extremely liberal. Like, I don't know, like Western religions will often be very dogmatic, like, oh, you have to believe X and X and X and X. A lot of Eastern religions will be like they'll embrace liberalism. Like if you want to create your own God and worship your own God, then you can do that without, necessarily infringing on the
that's
core
partly
beliefs.
how I think a group would avoid splintering is, first of all, it needs to be flexible on things like, well, any of the followers should be able to do whatever they want to do short of infringing on the freedom of someone else doing their thing. If you have a group that says other than that, no, you have to follow our dictates, even if you disagree, that's what's going to cause splintering.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I was kind of surprised to learn that Islam is that dogmatic that they make apostasy laws, because there are a lot of sects of Islam. There's like the Shiites and the Shias and the Alawites, and my understanding is that some of the sects, like Alawites especially, they deviate quite a bit from what's considered traditional Islam. In fact, they even get on the point where they're kind of like a mystical religion in certain sects of Islam. And then you have like the Nation of Islam in the United States, which I don't know if that's even really Islam. It might just be calling itself Islam, but yeah.
Well, that one seems not much different than Baha'ism. I don't know if you know about that, but Baha'ism came from Islam.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean has much about Islam, because look, any one of these people who take an older religion or thing and change it to something else, they can change it to whatever they want.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there might be outside factors trying to stop them, but when it's happening in a place of freedom, and that's where Baha'ism started, is in an area where it was relatively free.
Right.
And actually, that explains too why in the U.S. we have so many new cults, because our government gives them freedom to do it, and the people do too. Like, where if you were in Saudi Arabia, you probably can't start a new cult very easily.
Right. Yeah. There's a famous quote by I forget which, maybe Jean-Paul Sartre from he's a French philosopher. I think one of his famous quotes when he came to America is, in France we have 1,000 different types of cheeses and one religion, in the United States, you have one type of cheese and 1,000 different types of religion or something.
I never heard of that. That's
funny. Yeah.
And I didn't know supposedly we have one type of cheese. I thought Wisconsin.
Well, I mean,
state.
we're better now, but like I think at one point in like maybe this was probably written in like the 40s or 50s. Back then, I think grocery stores were pretty limited. Like we didn't have avocados, we didn't have mangoes. Most people ate Kraft cheese. So it's not like the whole. It wasn't like the Whole Foods of today where you can go in and get like hundreds of cheeses. But at the time, it was like my parents.
They were mostly focusing on what shows up in the big name grocery stores.
Right.
And yeah, America has more of big name grocery stores and less standalone grocery stores than any other country, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's the way it seems like. I mean, I've gone around I haven't traveled the world a lot, but I've traveled a little bit through Europe and Asia and stuff. And the first thing that struck me is how decentralized everything is. Like, there's a lot more people just sitting alongside the roads selling their products that they made in their own home or they grew in their own farm. And it's actually challenging in a lot of parts of Asia to find anything like a chain grocery store, because that's just not the way they do it. It's like a bunch of farmers markets essentially instead of a chain grocery store.
I mean, what happened in that scenario is they just haven't adopted the U.S. model yet. Yeah. And I'm not saying it's a good model because, like, I really think it's bad, and we shouldn't be talking about this. This is not related, but I think it's very bad the way meat is grown in the U.S. in industrialized scenarios where what they're doing, they don't care about our health.
Yeah.
I think it's much better if we buy from a local farmer.
Yeah, I think
I know it costs more. I know it costs more, but maybe eat less. Buy more expensive food and eat less.
Yeah.
If your food is twice as expensive, but you're eating half as much, that's probably fine. And I'm fat, by the way, probably 40 pounds too fat.
Yeah, me too.
That model could have worked for me.
Yeah. I mean, I recently got into like I mean, ideally, I would like to be almost a vegetarian, but because of the way I was raised, I guess I feel like my body needs meat for whatever reason, at least in moderation. But one thing I noticed recently is I had a few friends that took up hunting wild game, and they gave me some samples of that. And you can almost immediately taste how rich that is compared to what you get in the grocery store. It's like black and white. After eating that, you get a.
Are you referring to the word they use, gamey?
Gamey is part of it, but gamey kind of refers to like very lean meat that has a certain taste that's brought on by a lot of grass consumption. And that's good too. I mean, grass-fed beef is prized, so gamey is good because.
Since we're talking about this, let's go ahead and tell people why it has to be grass-fed. Cows evolved on grass. We're talking
exactly.
We're talking I don't know how many millions and millions and millions and millions of years.
Yeah,
and that also means all of their bacteria in their body evolved with grass. And I want to be clear for people real quick. We have more bacterial cells in our body than we have our own cells. So there's more bacteria cells in me than Rami cells.
Yeah.
And more of them are good than bad. They help us.
Yep.
Now,
I think even by weight there are. I think even if you do it by weight, you're about half Rami, half bacteria by weight, which is even crazier because you're.
Well, I'm not so sure about the weight. I'm pretty sure the bacteria.
I think if I remember it right, it is almost by
cells
weight
are
too.
smaller than the Rami cells.
Yeah, they are smaller, but there's I think if I remember right, there's different estimations of this because it's kind of a controversial area in biology. But I think there's way more bacteria cells, but then if you do it by weight, there's also like about a 50-50 or something. That's what I read.
Here's the point I was trying to make. So when we eat certain foods, we're feeding some bacterias and not others.
Yeah.
And that causes some bacterias to proliferate more. I can't say that word. To grow more, and the bacteria you're not feeding to grow less. And that's, by the way, that's the concept of probiotics. You're trying to feed your good bacteria.
Right. Yeah.
And by the way, so like if you eat a bunch of sugar, you're feeding the bacteria that feeds on sugar, letting them grow more, and you're starving the good bacteria, they will die. Now let's talk about the cows. We're now feeding them in industrialized scenarios. We're not feeding them grass, we're feeding them corn. Cows and their bacteria never evolved with corn. We don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
Your first assumption should be it's going to be bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're
Absolutely.
throwing a wrench in the whole system of evolution.
Yeah.
So that's going to cause their bad bacteria to grow and good bacteria to go down.
Yep. Yep. There's and it's also unhealthy levels of fat, toxic fats that's produced by that. I mean, some of my family used to grow cows, and if they wanted to get it like a really fatty cut, they would just lock the cow in the barn, not let them move, and just pump them with corn. And that created like meat that some people really liked, but it's actually probably the same kind of meat that clogs your arteries, right? And it leaves you dying of heart disease and things like that. And then there are certain foods that wild, like deer, will get that are not even fed at all to cows or deer in the factory farming, like nuts, berries, all that stuff is commonly eaten by wild animals, but they never would feed peanuts to factory farm because they're just too expensive. So yeah, it's wild.
Well, they're after going after the cheapest is what they're doing.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get back to the point. So
So that was an aside. Sorry.
Yeah. So I did a live stream on the birth of this organization, June 14th, 2024. And the reason I picked that date is that's the same date. It's the 50th anniversary of that Richard Feynman speech, 1974 Caltech commencement speech. And I did 3 interviews with experts. One was the scientific age. The second one was apostasy laws. The third one was cult behaviors in organizations. And I started a podcast to do roughly the same thing. It's for education about these things, the obstacles to reaching our goal, and how do we overcome the obstacles. And it's education in both directions, for us to educate the world, but also me to get educated, and our audience to get educated by expert guests. And they don't even have to be expert guests. It's like I talked to somebody from Nigeria to learn about things going on there. I don't know anything about Nigeria. I mean, he's not technically an expert. He's 23 years old, but compared to me, he's an expert, know. And I started a weekly live stream with Dr. Usama El-Binni. He was also on the June 14th live stream, where we're helping people who are struggling with Islam, and we're also helping the outside world better understand our problems.
Mm-hmm.
And then the organization is also trying to help other people and their projects that are tackling the same obstacles we're trying to tackle. KAOS is one. Another one is it's a podcast called The As Is Method by Dr. Leah Zitter. She's working with people from all sorts of high control religions, cults, conspiracy groups, people that left them, to help them, decondition themselves and to remove their limiting beliefs. And so I think her project would help us a lot too, but she's going after more than just ex-Muslims,
Yeah.
And I'm sure there will be more. Right now, I'm trying to help that Nigerian man I told you about, Ahmed is his name. I asked him, if he's trying to do any activism, and he said yes, he'd like to. So we agreed that I'd be helping him start something. It might take a while. He's only 23 years old. Maybe he needs a few years, but I'm going to help him from now until then, and actually after that too, obviously.
Uh-huh.
I'm trying to connect with people all around the world,
Mm-hmm. That was one of my questions for you. Like if you have, so if you wanted to get rid of apostasy laws and blasphemy laws, where those are most prominent, I understand, is probably the Middle Eastern world. And do they censor internet like they would in China? So it'd be hard to even get those ideas out there. Like you can't post something to X without it being removed by the Saudi authorities.
There's many countries, so you'd have to talk about each one separately.
Yeah, that's.
I've never heard of any of them being as bad as like North Korea.
Okay.
But in any case, people do figure out how to circumvent all that.
Yeah. Yeah, like we were talking about in KAOS, they have VPNs and things like that.
Yeah. I want to say one more thing. I was trying to focus on this early on in this organization, but I've not done much of it lately. There's another organization that I thought was doing very well and is doing very well in what it's trying to do. AHA, Ayan Hirsi Ali Foundation. Her organization focuses on women's rights all around the world, and it's the kind the kind of rights that she's dealing with is the kind of stuff that that Muslim countries deal with, like female genital mutilation, FGM. She's working on getting rid of that. Their organization works with lawmakers all over the world, but not just in the worst countries, but also even in America.
Right.
Because even in America, there's some states that allow effectively forced marriages of young girls. And part of why they're allowing it is, well, that's their religion. We're not fucking with that.
Okay.
Which is incorrect, because it's not protecting the rights of the child.
Right.
And they have made progress with some states. So what I thought is to, an organization like mine is brand new and we don't know anything, to work with an organization like that to learn how they're doing things so that we can do it too. I tried to get a meeting with Ayan Hirsi Ali. It didn't work out. She didn't take the meeting, even though I paid for it. I paid to be a founding member of her organization, $500, and her communication manager replied to me and said, "Hey, let's set up the meeting." And then they ghosted me a little bit, so I emailed again, and they said, "Oh, we changed it to, instead of a one-on-one meeting, it's going to be a Ayan Hirsi Ali meeting with all the founding members." And then they ghosted me again. And now they don't reply to me at all. So I don't really know what happened there, but maybe they just don't want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I've dealt with the same stuff. I don't know how you would like to think that we live in the digital age where you can just reach out to any public figure and then you just. But I've struggled with the same stuff.
It was her offer, though. It wasn't my offer even. I just took her offer. I didn't offer it. Yeah. She when she started this new thing called restoration. You could be a member, and one of the offers was to be the founding member, $500, and you get a meeting with her. So it was her offer that I accepted. It wasn't like me offering and her reluctantly accepting. It's different.
Yeah. Did you get your money back?
No. They didn't reply.
Yeah. That's ridiculous. All right. Well, I don't know.
And I waited.
Hopefully there's something like. Hopefully there's some kind of thing you're not aware of. Like, I don't know. Maybe she had a death in the family or something. I don't know.
Well, my guess is she doesn't agree with my philosophy.
Yeah.
It's a little bit similar to what's happening with Brian Charleboy in KAOS, where there are a lot of people trying to work on something like this, but they have a fundamental disagreement on what the real problem is and how to go about solving it, since they don't even agree what the problem is. In the case of KAOS, we think there shouldn't be systemic control, and they think there should be, because they think we can't handle it, or like the users or the customer base, we're not smart enough to handle it or something.
Yeah.
In the case of Ayan Hirsi Ali, I think it's something like, and I say this because she did an interview with Richard Dawkins where she explains that she thinks the major problem in the US is, and maybe all around the world, that people who became atheists are dealing with nihilism and then she said wokeism too, as if it's like an automatic thing. Like if you become an atheist, therefore you're going to be nihilistic, and therefore you're going to be part of wokeism. And then so that's how she sees the problem. Oh, and she also talks about the Russians over the past bunch of decades, going back, I don't know, 60 years, have been trying to what's the word she used? I forget the word, but undermine the US culture by shoving wokeism into it. Okay.
Yeah.
And so she thinks the solution is Christianity. Become Christian. Because now you won't be nihilistic and you won't be with wokeism and stuff like that.
What did Richard Dawkins, because Richard Dawkins is an avowed atheist, so what did he have to say to that when she...
I don't think he answered very well. He said, we need more humanism and more rationality. But that's not a real good answer.
Yeah.
It's not saying how to do it. And also, I don't think he really understands the problem very well. One thing I'll say about the problem, the way she described it is, you know, and I use the metaphor. If you imagine what Russia was doing to us as a sword coming at us, well, okay, a sword is one thing, but if you have a shield, you'd be fine from the sword. And there's something that happened in the US going back to the mid 1800s that I would use a metaphor for. The top leaders were destroying our shield, which allowed the sword to come hit us easily. And the shield I'm talking about is to do with education. You know, the only way you can be shielded from propaganda, it's not to censor the propaganda, it's to be educated enough where you can recognize it as propaganda.
Yeah.
So what I mean is, what happened in the late 1800s, this is just after our Civil War, the main one. I found out there was a previous one before that. In Utah.
The
Mormons,
yeah.
which was a few years before the main one that we got taught about. So anyway, what happened was, before this point, we did not have compulsory education. You were not forced to go to school.
Yeah.
What happened was, after a few series of events, we had compulsory education. K to 12, forced to go to school. You know, there became a thing began, which was the truancy officer. If a kid doesn't go to school, truancy officer comes to your house. Hey, what are you doing? And maybe that on its own doesn't, you know, people wouldn't know what's wrong with it yet. But here's what's wrong with it. If you look at the documents, by the way, I learned all this from a book, The Underground History of American Education, by a guy named John Taylor Gatto. He was a New York City school teacher for like 30 plus years. And he won awards for best teacher of the year at the city level and the state level. And he was digging into, the reason he got interested was he was noticing, you know, like people don't seem to have, people coming through the school, I mean, well, first of all, he noticed every generation was like getting worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you'd think that would be getting better, not worse. Like that's the point of doing compulsory education. Let's, you know, literacy scores should be going up. He knows this is going down. And he noticed a weird thing happening with his students. Like they seem to not see themselves as really having a lot of agency. And they only saw themselves as being a small part of a big company rather than doing something to change the world as like the head guy of the company. And he started digging deep. And what he found was things like documents written by the people that made compulsory education in America. These were psychologists doing what they called social engineering. And they laid out what the goals were and their policies that met those goals. The goals were to make people obedient citizens.
Yeah, I have heard that theory. That's interesting. Yeah.
To make people obedient citizens. And what that means is they're educating them just enough to be functional economically, working for big companies, but not smart enough to question the status quo of the leadership, question politics, or even question the big companies, or even start your own company. And that's been going on like 8 generations. And it's been getting worse each time. Each generation, I mean. Because you can imagine the first generation, the teachers doing the teaching, well, they weren't indoctrinated in that system.
Yeah.
And then the second generation, those teachers, they were indoctrinated in that system, but their parents weren't. And then the next generation of teachers, they were indoctrinated in the system, and their parents were, but their grandparents weren't. That's not too bad. Well, now you have teachers in our school system indoctrinated in that system. Their parents were also, going back 8 generations.
Yeah. Then it just kind of slowly leaves the critical thinking faculties just kind of completely get eliminated from the population right after several generations, right?
Well, actually, yeah, you're right. It happens like that naturally, but also it happened in a design element. They removed philosophy. I'm getting angry. I got to calm down for a second.
It's all right.
They removed philosophy from what was the standard education before that. So let me explain for a little bit. The standard education before American compulsory education started was what people call the classical education. It goes back to Socrates. The classics is the ancient Greek philosophy. A classical education is, step 1 is, okay, yeah, you learn some language and grammar. Step 2 is learn how to think, philosophy. Step 3 is give the student all the other stuff like physics, chemistry, biology, politics, whatever, and let them apply what they learned in philosophy about how to think to those topics. What we do in school is, well, one small thing is they don't even teach you grammar anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't teach you subject, verb, predicate. They don't teach you how to figure out if a statement is grammatical or not. What they do instead is, like, I remember the tests, the standardized testing for grammar. They would show you a sentence. They would say, this is incorrect grammatically. Here's 4 options. Which one's right? That's just using our intuition. And that is helpful to test us, but it's not helpful in teaching us how to get better at grammar.
Right, yeah.
So they don't even teach grammar, and they don't teach philosophy. It's nowhere in any class in K-12. And then if you go to college, yeah, there's a philosophy department, and yes, there's philosophy classes, but almost none of the degree programs require a philosophy class.
Yeah.
I got a degree in physics, a bachelor's degree in physics, didn't need a philosophy class, never took one.
Yeah, I took a few philosophy classes, but that was just because I had electives and then it happened to be my interest. But I'm the same here. I got a chemistry degree, and there were no requirements for philosophy, even though science originated it as literally natural philosophy. So
yeah, and people don't know that. People don't know that. They don't know that Isaac Newton, who we call him a physicist now, but at the time he was called a natural philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
And that got divided up into physics, chemistry, biology, and all the other natural philosophies. Philosophies about nature.
Yeah.
Everything is philosophy. It's all philosophy. Religion is philosophy.
Yep.
Now,
yeah.
Here's what happens, though. Me, growing up in America, I was born and raised in the U.S. to parents who are from Syria. And they were Muslim parents. I wasn't getting philosophy in school. And not in college either. So what did I have on my menu? If you imagine I have a menu of ideas to adopt related to like morality or even spirituality or whatever. On the menu is Islam, Christianity. I don't remember ever hearing the term humanism, not in school. So what's on my menu?
Were they,
Islam and
were they
Christianity.
extremely, just let me interject real quick. So would you say they were extremely devout Muslims, or were they kind of like centrist Muslims?
Extremely liberal.
Extremely liberal.
But when I say extremely liberal, I mean relative to where they came from.
Okay.
I don't mean compared to America.
Okay.
And they didn't know much about Islam. Like they didn't even know I'm sure they didn't know about the apostasy law. And I'm sure they didn't know about marrying 6-year-olds.
Well, at the time, Syria was kind of a more liberal country than it is now, right? They had more, I guess, secular rulers back probably when they were.
Yeah, I don't know much about how it is now, but I think they're going backwards now.
Yeah, they're going backwards, like a lot of the Islamic world is. Yeah.
Which, by the way, part of the blame for that, and I don't mean in particular Syria, but I mean all of them. Part of what's holding those countries back from leaving Islam is what other more powerful countries are doing from the outside. So, like, there's cases where, and of course, they're not doing it just to Muslim countries. The US was involved in many countries of, like, you know, helping them overthrow their ruler for another one. And the one they helped come in power wasn't good for the people.
Right. Yeah. Like the Assads and then Iran. That was.
Well, I don't want to name any particular one. I don't know. But the point is, it's happened a lot. And I want to make 2 points about it. They picked somebody that they saw as good for America, but really it's good just for those guys in America. It's not good for all Americans.
Right.
What would be good for all Americans is whatever country and leader they end up in power is, it's good for those people in a way that, you know, helps them like improve education and helps them unshackle from whatever horrible things going on in that country now, like an extreme version of Islam. And, you know, like what the US does with Saudi Arabia, where they, you know, the US shields Saudi Arabia a lot from all sorts of things just so they can keep the relationship of you know, oil, and maybe also to have a friend in the Middle East aside from Israel, you know, and have more than one friend in the Middle East. But that stuff's not good for the people in Saudi Arabia, and it's not good for Americans, and it's not good for the whole world.
Yeah.
And this is why I say the main obstacle for our organization is truth-seeking and propaganda. You know, every time the U.S. did one of these things, they lied about what they were doing too. You know, they weren't being honest about why they were doing it, or, you know, and most of the times they even hid that they were doing it. It was the CIA doing it. And they're
I got into a discussion with a Iraqi the other day, or he used to be an Iraqi. Now he lives here for the last 20 years or something, but he was actually a pretty high-ranking military officer in the old Iraqi government under Saddam Hussein. And as it became clear that the U.S. wanted to come in and dismantle Iraq, the U.S. wanted allies that were from the region to kind of fill the vacuum that Saddam's government's dismantling would leave. And he said that, in his opinion, the U.S. did absolutely no intel on these people. Like, they just wanted someone that was going to oppose Saddam. They didn't want necessarily good people. They didn't want people that would build a good government. They just wanted someone to come in that wasn't Saddam's government. And he said what happened is you got a lot of militants that were actually supported by the CIA that were tied to Iran. And now that's why Iran is so dominant in Iraq, and the country is becoming almost like a client state of Iran that isn't doing very well economically and is very unstable, you know, because of the CIA basically supporting those people. And in fact, this guy, I kind of felt sorry for him. He went from like a high-ranking officer in the government to now he in the early 2000s, he was actually the victim of several assassination attempts against him and his family. So he was like forced to leave, basically. And yeah, and so that's an angle I hadn't heard before. Everyone, it's common knowledge that the U.S. botched the Iraq war pretty badly, but just to have the CIA openly supporting militants that were from a foreign country, that's ridiculous. That'd be like if we invaded.
I remember about it, what I heard about it from people from Iraq, isn't that the CIA was involved. It was very open. There was a guy that the U.S. appointed as the guy that's going to lead the whole project over there, the after the war, the reconstruction or whatever. And he made and he didn't know anything about Iraq either. The guy they appointed. He made a decision to not allow anyone that was in the old government in the new government.
Right. Yeah.
That is ridiculous because all those people just went to ISIS.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And here's the point. They weren't all bad. A lot of the people that were in the government weren't there to support Saddam. It's more like for one, they needed a job. A lot of people just needed a job. So some people are doing it just for a little bit of money. And they tried not to do the bad things. Of course, it's hard to get away from that. They're probably letting a bunch of it happen without saying anything, or you get killed kind of thing,
Yeah.
Saddam was very bad to his people. Very, very ruthless. They learned a lot from the Russians and how during the Imperial Russian era.
Yeah.
So a lot of the people that were in Saddam's government could have been fine in the new government, and that would have been better. That would have been a lot. Those are the people that know how to run the government a little bit. Now they have just a bunch of new people. They don't know anything about how anything runs.
Yeah, exactly.
And by sending them away like that, you just sent them to ISIS. Now, at the time, ISIS wasn't there yet, and they didn't know that Al Qaeda from Afghanistan is going to come to Iraq and then splinter and become ISIS. But they should know things like that.
Right. Yeah.
That is what happened that's how Al Qaeda formed in the first place. It was a scenario where it was the 1980s. It was, Afghanistan. Russia was invading Afghanistan. And the U.S. tried to help by not only supporting the Mujahideen. Mujahideen means people that do jihad. Okay. Not only were they supporting them, but they were even helping them recruit people. So they're recruiting. Now, at the time, they weren't calling them terrorists. They're calling them freedom fighters. Then later, when the Mujahideen at some point changed alliances, and then the U.S. decided to start calling them terrorists.
Yeah, right.
But they didn't change their ideology. They didn't change their policies. The only thing they changed was who they were allying with.
Right.
Away from the U.S. and towards someone else. I don't know why. I don't know the details. So, that's a point right there to say the term terrorist, maybe it's a good term, but most of the time it's propaganda.
Right, yeah. Just labeling your enemies as terrorists. Yeah.
Same for Islamophobia. Suppose Islamophobia is a valid term and it applies to certain types of actions, but a lot of times, or most of the time, it's used as a propaganda term to silence legitimate criticism.
Right. Yep. And so back to your what you were saying on the your parents and when you were in the growing up in the U.S., you had like a menu of different ideologies that you could learn in school, and one of them wasn't really humanism or philosophy.
Well, it wasn't learning in school. No, it wasn't about school. What I mean is school didn't provide what the standard education was before that, philosophy. And if philosophy was there, that would have been on my menu. Mm-hmm. Look, here, they're talking about philosophy. They're talking about how we know things. They're talking about how to behave, how to live a good life. And this isn't Islam, and it's not Christianity. I didn't leave Islam till I was 32. If I had philosophy in school, maybe I would have been 10 or 12 or 15.
Right. And then what made you leave? What was the kind of the nail in the coffin?
Oh,
leaving?
shit. Okay. I was thinking there's not much topics left to say, but you just opened a big one.
I'm gonna hold up more.
Yeah. So feel free to keep asking questions because that's complicated. But one thing I'll say is, and this is how I've explained it to people, you kind of have to go back to, what was my reasoning for being a Muslim in the first place, right before I left Islam. But even that, you need more context. If you ask anyone in their earliest part of their life why they're a Muslim, the reason is my parents told me. And I mean the people that were born to it, not the converts. And then at some point, as a child or whatever age, you start to think more critically and thought about this. You don't have that as your reasoning for why you're a Muslim. You have some other reasoning now.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure no one remembers their original reasoning. My parents told me. No one remembers that. But then later you realize your new reasoning is dumb and you make up a new reasoning. Then you realize that's dumb and you make up a new one. Well, the last one I had before I left Islam was, look, Islam and any religion, it's to teach you how to live a good life, to make a good life for yourself here on earth. And then I watched my ex-wife follow Islam more, and I'll tell you how. And it ruined her life. It was ruining her life. So that was evidence contradicting my theory. And that's when I became an atheist.
I see. Yeah.
Now here's what she was doing. So we had just separated. She wasn't doing well. Like she wasn't independent yet. She didn't know how to have a job. But other than that, she didn't know how to like run her own life, when we separated, the idea was, and this is like a conception from Arab culture and also Muslim culture, whatever. And I had this conception that the mother raises the child mainly, and the father's really there for money.
Right. Yeah.
And so when we separated, that was our understanding. She has the kids. I make money. I provide, even after the divorce, obviously. But she couldn't do that even. She wasn't doing well emotionally. She started to believe, and I think this even started before we separated. She started to believe, she believed she's possessed by jinn, demons. And I got to say, I never believed that stuff. I thought that stuff was, I knew it was in the Quran, but I thought it was like symbolism.
Right.
To teach lessons. But then I realized after watching what she did, holy crap, this is horrible. Even if this really was intended as just symbolism by God, people are not taking it that way and they're ruining their lives with it. So this is horrible. We should not have stupid symbolism like this in a religion.
Right. Yeah.
And then I found out worse than that. Not only is there just this symbolism about jinn or whatever, if it really was symbolism, the Quran instructs you to go see an exorcist to get rid of the jinn. And in my conception of things, you go to a hospital when you have mental issues.
Yeah.
Now, at the time, before I realized these things and I was in the middle of it, I thought my ideas were Islamic. But this thing she was doing, and I found out she's following Islam, contradicted that theory too, that what I was doing, which I thought was Islamic, isn't actually Islamic. So the idea of going to a hospital, that's not Islamic. You go to an exorcist because you think you're possessed by jinn. There's no jinn. That's just superstition. And to be more clear for everybody that's listening, psychiatrists studied this issue and found out that tons of people believe they're possessed, not just by jinn, God, the devil, their dead loved ones, all sorts of things, even inanimate objects. And so what we've learned is people think they're possessed. First of all, you have to have a belief that you can be possessed, and then you have a belief of something that is possessing you. Those two things have to be in your head first.
Right.
I knew I can't have the problem my ex-wife had because I don't believe in jinn. I don't believe in possessions.
Right.
That's why I can't have that problem. It's an issue of beliefs first, and that's what the scientific research clearly explains. You know, we can invent any idea, so we can think we're possessed by anything. A pencil.
Right. Well, I mean, so in the only parallel I know is in the Catholic Church. You also have the concept of exorcism and possession, but that's considered like whether you believe it or not, it's considered extremely rare. And then mental illness is the explanation for 99% of cases that people are dealing with. And you will even have priests that say that if someone comes to them and say they're like, yeah, if someone comes to them and say that they're possessed, they'll ask them like a series of 20 questions, and they'll say 99% of the time you're mentally ill, go to a hospital. But does Islam not necessarily have that kind of check?
Well, let me clarify what you're saying. Yeah. I don't believe the Bible has what you're saying. I believe Christians who are scientific minded
made that up. Yeah, made that.
And there's Muslims who are scientific minded who think that way too.
Right.
But then you have a dumb little mix where, well, I guess what you said is also a dumb mix, because what they say is, and I've had people contradict me by saying, no, Islam says go to a doctor when you have some issues, but if it's a jinn issue, go to an exorcist. And another way to say that is, I guess, go to the doctor. If that doesn't work, then go to the jinn.
Yeah.
And I guess some people are doing the reverse way. Go to the exorcist. If that doesn't work, then go to a doctor.
Yeah. I think one thing I've really had a hard time recently, as I've been on Reddit more often, is how many people out there, they don't read religious text. They know like maybe some core principles from their childhood. Like, I don't know, say they know the Quran in its most basic form, and then they just run with it. Like, they come up with all these other far-flung ideas, like there's, jinns work this way, or like angels work this way, and none of that has any basis in, not even basis in rationality, but not even basis in the text. And that's really
you mean the way I saw it too?
Yeah.
Symbolism. We're seeing it as lessons, but no, there's not actually jinn like that. And I want to be clear about something else. You see the same kind of talk by Christians about demons, where they say stuff like, and even you still use terms like this, I'll say to someone, let's say they were getting angry at me for something, and let's say it's misplaced anger. And I'll say, look, don't bring out your demons, because that'll make my demons come out.
No, yeah. I've heard people say that. Yeah.
And that's a symbol. That's symbolism there. It's a metaphor. We're not really saying there's demons. We're saying there's ideas in our heads, whether you call it an idea or something else. Anger brings anger. It doesn't have to. You can get better at not doing that, but it reliably does it.
Right. So like natural mirror neurons. There's this whole study, this whole idea of mirror neurons, how we evolved as a species, that we want to be constantly mimicking others in our social groups so that we, respond appropriately. Like, if you just sit there and someone punches you in the face, that is a problem, evolutionary psychology speaking, because what you should be doing is getting ready to punch them back, right? And that applies to all kinds.
I'm guessing there's some truth to what you're saying, but I would say the bigger role goes to mimetic knowledge, not genetic knowledge.
Yeah.
And I'll say it that way because the way David Joyce explains it in The Beginning of Infinity, look, we've been evolving genetically for so long And the way that works is a more fit gene, a gene replaces a rival gene by getting itself copied into the grandchildren, where the other ones are being less copied. Or another way to say that is the way I pass off my genes to the gene pool is by having kids before I die. Having kids before I die. That's the basic point. If I die before I have kids, my genes don't go to the gene pool.
Right.
Now, memes, and if you think of just medicine, we stop people from dying. We're stopping genetic evolution from working. Because now, even if I have a genetic thing causing a disease that before medicine would have killed me before I had kids, now with medicine, I have kids and I pass off those genes to the gene pool.
Right. Yeah.
Now, and here's the point. Slowly, genetic evolution has been not happening and been being replaced with mimetic evolution. Our medicine is getting better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I forgot why I brought this up. Oh, the mirror.
Yeah, I think, it's like Richard Dawkins also has one of his early books, Selfish Gene. I recommend there because I think he's the one that coined it originally, and that's a good read on memes too. But yeah,
he's the first person to coin the term meme from his book, The Selfish Gene. But from what I understand, the person who invented the idea, but not the term meme, was Karl Popper. He showed how mimetic knowledge or human knowledge evolves pretty much in the same way as genetic knowledge does.
Right. Yeah, there's a whole controversy right now about how we delineate those two forms of evolution, because, like, I don't know, something everyone can relate to is having dreams about wild animals chasing you. Is a good example. And I mean, I don't know if you've personally experienced that, but most people have pretty frequent dreams of being chased by a tiger or being chased by a wolf or something. And that's kind of hard to explain inside of either framework. It's hard to explain through memes because, none of us have experienced that, especially in Western society. We don't really have that day-to-day experience of being chased by animals.
But our parents showed us TV shows of animals killing each other.
That's true.
Let
and
me
also
tell
there's,
you a dream
there's
I
dogs
had.
and stuff.
Let me tell you a dream I had when I was really young. And I don't remember if the reason I had this dream is because I watched a movie right before it, but that's my guess. So in this dream, me and my two brothers are watching TV, and what we're seeing on the TV is a movie with a guy who's riding a huge spider. It's the spider is the size of a house.
Okay.
That's what we're watching on this TV. And then that spider and that guy broke into the house from behind us. And we were trying to get away, and we climbed up. I guess behind the TV was the fireplace. We climbed up the chimney, and I remember trying to get up. And then I remember like the spider was like destroying things, so I was falling. Finally, I got out. My brothers weren't with me anymore. And I'm in the desert, which makes no sense to me. I never lived in the desert.
Yeah.
And I'm walking, and the spider's not there anymore. Somehow I escaped the spider. And finally, I'm at my grandfather's house, which is across the Pacific Ocean. Yeah, then that was the whole dream. Now,
yeah.
I don't know what there could happen genetically, but mimetically, maybe I watched a TV show with a giant spider.
That's true. Yeah, I think that's probably the idea. There's still some holdouts that think that somehow genetic information can encode thoughts, but I've never heard a good mechanism for how that could be the case. So it probably is, memes of some sort. Whether you doing it through TV you watch, or maybe your mind picks up on dogs that were mean to you or something. Yeah, I don't know. Or people who hate spiders and
Well,
all right. Yeah. Anyway, go on with your point.
I'm still sort of scared of spiders.
Yeah. Me too.
Maybe
Oh
not
yeah.
from that event. I don't like spiders. I don't like roaches.
don't
I
like them
remember when I
either.
was really young, I used to be willing to like touch insects, like a roly-poly. But somehow that went away from me. I don't like those kind of things.
Yeah, I was the same way. I was not. I think it's kind of a natural trajectory in everyone's life to gain more fears as you get more experience. I mean, I would do crazy stuff when I was a kid, like jump off ramps, skateboarding, and like play with dogs that were rabid dogs, and do all kinds of crazy stuff that I would never do today. But I don't know. It's
Yeah.
partly just like more memes you accumulate in your mind that have to do with fear. The more fear affects you, and
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be like an emotional fear, but it's a concern about a danger, and you're avoiding that danger. You don't have to
right.
be. You don't have to be like emotional about it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So like when I was 16 and I was driving, I drove in a way I would never drive now.
Yeah.
Like a little bit of drunk driving, driving too fast around a curve, driving too fast in a car that's not really for speed.
Right.
And I got away from that kind of quick, but then it went into overdrive when I had kids.
Right.
Because I thought, because I thought if I'm dead, they're fucked. So I remember being in Chicago. I live in central Illinois, Peoria, Illinois, 3 hours away from Chicago. I was in Chicago once, and I had to drive home, and then I found out it just started. Was it snowing or raining? Snowing. And I thought, nah, I'm not gonna go home now, just because of the small extra chance of dying from bad weather and driving.
Yeah.
And before that, I was never afraid of stuff like that. And I'm a really good driver when it comes to, knowing how to drive in snow and stuff. So it's not like I was fearing in that way. And again, there wasn't like, I don't think there was, I wasn't having emotions like a heart palpitation or anything like that. I just remember deciding, no, I'm not going to take the chance. I'm not going to see them tonight. That's fine. Let's just wait till tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I think you get more rational minded and you realize how dangerous the world can be versus when you're a kid, you're just kind of like, I'm invincible. Yeah.
Like so I used to play football in high school. I didn't play in college. And then much later in my life, if I would try to watch a football game, I can't watch them hit each other. I would like close my eyes when I see a big hit about to happen.
Yeah.
And part of what changed is, well, I got hurt a little bit. And I remember having a concussion. Actually, it's lots of concussions. I found out later. No one taught us about that stuff back then.
Yeah.
They would tell us to hit our heads, by the way. I wonder how much brain damage I got in my head.
Yeah.
That. And by the way, I would tell everybody, if I do anything bad, I'm going to blame it on that.
Yeah, they had that. What was that guy that he was from Pennsylvania, I think, which is why I know about it. He went and after he got out of the NFL, he went and like killed some people and all this stuff. And then he, I forget his name now, but then once he finally like committed suicide or something, they did an autopsy and his brain was like completely messed up because of how many football hits he did over the course of his life. But he was playing well into his 40s, and I think as long as you stop that stuff relatively young, I think the body has a tendency to heal itself.
Yeah, well, I would say the main problem about what you just said is these people who they get a big concussion, okay, but they don't even take them out of the game or let them heal for a couple of weeks. Yeah, you're right back into the game, right back. So you have some damage in your brain that if you gave it 2 weeks to heal and then did it again, that wouldn't be so bad. What they're doing for 20 years is damage, don't let it heal, damage again, don't let it heal, damage again. You're only going down that way.
Yeah.
But I mean, I did play, for a year, 1, 2 seasons, 3. The seasons that were bad, I guess, were 3 seasons. And that was, concussion, don't let it heal. Concussion, don't let it heal. It was like that.
Yeah.
But for only 3 seasons.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a trade-off with teaching kids, because I think I also had like a football injury when I was about 8th grade or something. I broke my jaw, actually. I probably got some kind of concussion from that. And then there are other things, like one time I was riding my bike and I forgot to brake and I nailed a tree and scraped it. And a lot of these things are probably good to learn to some extent. Not like you should put your kids in danger, but they're good to learn to some extent when you're young. Because now I see people that were part of the helicopter kid generation, the self-esteem movement, and they get out of like high school and they've never done anything dangerous. So when they go to college, they drunk drive and get themselves killed, and the stakes are higher then, or they get like DUI convictions and things like that. And so yeah, I mean there are trade-offs, but
yeah, well, I mean, one couple of things I'll say about that is there are safer sports.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
and also you could play football in a more safe way.
Right, flag football or something like that. Yeah.
Well, even if it's regular football, and they do this better now. Like when I was young, I remember in NFL football, they didn't have the rule where, don't spear someone. Where you lead with your head into somebody's body or even their head. Now that's not allowed. And they have more rules around how you can like hit the quarterback.
Yeah.
So all those things could be happening to make it safer. And that was partly why the first years of football, there was the helmet was leather. There was nothing in front of the face.
Yeah, didn't even have football helmets in rugby.
Yeah, but actually that had a negative effect too, because now your protection became a weapon.
Right. Yeah.
And it gave you the confidence to hit harder because you had protection, but that's more damage. There's safer. Now the second thing I'll say about what you said, helicopter parenting and the self-esteem movement. Yeah, that's horrible. Helicopter parenting. By the way, there's a new term now, helicopter politicking. And that's the thing that all those other guys are doing. That's their conception of things regarding competitors to KAOS. They want helicopter politicking. And what you're doing there is you're preventing people from learning.
Right.
Preventing people from learning from their mistakes. And the self-esteem movement itself, I don't know if that grew out from it, but the self-esteem movement, which I think blew up in America in the 70s, I forget the name of the writer, psychologist. But from what I understand, he said something like, I had high self-esteem, and then I succeeded in my life. Therefore, this is correlation causation.
Yeah.
Therefore, if you have good self-esteem, then you're going to succeed in life. Well, that doesn't work, and that's ridiculous. And the idea he had actually isn't very new. It goes back a couple thousand years, I found out. The proper way, just having self-esteem. If somebody says fake things to you so you have high self-esteem, you're just leading them into big awakening when they realize from others, like they lose their first job or something, and their boss said, "You suck at this, that's why I'm firing you." Well, if their parents weren't lying to them their whole life, it would have been better in that scenario. For one thing, they'd be able to take criticism better.
Right. Yeah, I think that's one thing I've read is one theory about why quality of education has declined since the 1990s is because self-esteem gets worse every year. Now in college, I read an article by a professor at Yale, I think. In Yale, Ivy League school, you'd think they'd be the best and brightest. He said people in college can't read anymore, like can't read long form books. He said, I had to make my curriculum reading essays or reading just portions of books because they don't have the attention span to, just read an entire book anymore because of phones.
I would say the bigger problem there is people trying to read things they're not interested in.
Yeah. Well, that's part of it for sure. So they could do a better job of, making there more options so that people can kind of customize their own education. But one thing you can't get over is that in a real life job, you're going to have to do things that you don't want to do, right? Like even if you're doing something that you want to do, like I like science, I'll still find scientific papers pretty frequently that I'm like, oh, this is boring, this sucks, but I have to read it because it's part of the canon of the field that I'm.
We talked about a lot. Are you interested in anything else? Got any other questions, or do you want to talk about? I don't know.
I don't. I think we should continue this discussion because I'd like to hear more about United the Cults. Unfortunately, at 10:30, I have to be somewhere, so we're gonna have to cut it short. But I would like to do this again soon, and then kind of give you a chance to continue to kind of go through what your vision for the organization is, and I'm curious about this kind of stuff. So I grew up in a liberal Catholic family too, and then broke away, was an atheist for a while, and now I'd say I'm more religious now than I had been when I was in my teens and 20s. So yeah, I'm kind of like I have a complicated relationship with religion. So, but it's definitely one of my interests. So I'd like to hear more about your opinions on it and everything. So.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe next week we can do it again or something.
Yeah, and actually, we might as well take this time here to schedule something because it's easier to do that while we're on the call here. Yeah, so this was fun, and I think it's very productive. And yeah, I'm really excited about the next one too. Especially, I mean, you said you want to talk about more uniting the cults, but also you want to talk about like religion, which, by the way, connects to that issue we talked about related to Ayin Hirsi Ali. And actually, I'll say one more thing about that. In my conception, I would like to work with her on these things. We have similar goals.
Right.
And I'd like to help her with her project too. But it seems like she doesn't want my help. She doesn't want to work with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that doesn't make sense. Like, okay, you and me, I'm an atheist. You're not an atheist. I still think we should be working together. Like,
exactly. Yeah,
I'm not going to cut people out because they don't share my view on some randomly. I say random because I don't look. In my view, it doesn't even matter if there's a God, because what is true for morality, what is true about what we should do, is independent of whether there's a God or not.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I think so one of the problems I have with the religion atheist debate right now is that it's gotten so, just like everything in our culture, has gotten so polarized. People have been atheists for centuries, and there have been atheists that have had whole philosophical books they wrote, and then they would communicate back and forth with theists, and they reach some kind of understanding of why each one of them believes what they believe. That you don't see that today, especially on Reddit. I'll call it like the atheist extremist. They're not even willing to like meet you. Where you meet you at your level, right? If you say anything related to God, they're immediately ready to just like shut you down. And that's not just with religion. That's with politics, and that's with like everything in our society. And I'm not sure why our society is developed that way. I don't know if it has to do with the fact that we don't spend a lot. One thing I think we don't spend enough time on in education is verbal debate. Everyone goes into school. Yeah, philosophy, verbal debate, Socratic
that's
thinking.
What philosophy is you're debating ideas.
Right. Yeah.
Practically how to think.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I talked to one educator on that, and she was like, well, we spend like an hour every day talking about evolutionary theory to grade schoolers. And yeah, evolutionary theory is very important. I'm a PhD in biology and chemistry, so I understand the importance of evolutionary theory. But is that important for, grade schoolers to spend an entire hour every day for a semester thinking about evolution? Or should they maybe use more of that time to think about classical logic, creativity?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll add one thing to what you're saying. They could be talking about evolutionary theory in a debating way, meaning discuss the other rival theories.
Right. Yeah.
Like creationism.
I agree with that.
Like
Right.
creationism.
Yep.
And let them decide. And use the Socratic method, meaning, look, the old way, before the Socratic method, the old way of teaching was the teacher would dictate what is the truth. And the way the students were judged was by how closely they parroted the teacher.
Right.
And the Socratic method, the new style of teaching, was the teacher would, and by the way, the first time I experienced this was, as far as I know, 5th grade, like in a school setting. I mean, maybe, you know, certain people did it with me in non-school setting context. I don't know. But so in 5th grade, this was history class. The teacher presented some historical context and asked us a question, something like, why did this leader do X? And the idea was for us to develop our answers. And she would ask us questions to help us develop our answers. And we were discussing with each other, the students, I mean. And I remember at one time saying, well, am I right? Did I get it right? And the teacher wouldn't answer because her answer doesn't matter. Even if she said an answer, it doesn't mean I'm going to understand it.
Yeah.
I have to develop the answer.
Right.
So they could have been doing that with the evolution theory.
Yeah.
But
that's why Socrates in Plato's Republic, for example, he never really comes to a conclusion himself. He just stimulates the other person's thought and allows them to reach the conclusion through questioning, essentially.
And he was executed by the state.
Yeah.
Or the charge was
corrupting the youth.
Corrupting the youth against God. Specifically, they said against God.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, so in my experience, evolution's taught today. When I was in school, we didn't really learn too much about evolution. At the time, it was kind of controversial to teach that in schools, at least where I was at, because of influence of evangelical Christians and things. But we learned a lot more about zoology, but it was just kind of like memorization. You know, like polar bears live in Antarctica. You know, plants have flowering plants and then the non-flowering plants. That kind of just like learning all these. And there are good things about learning to memorize large amounts of information. I'm not saying that there's not. That needs to be emphasized more in our education too. But it's interesting that a lot of Asian cultures will overemphasize memorization, and now they're kind of recognizing the advantages of liberal education in the United States, where we kind of try to emphasize to some extent more critical thinking and verbal debate and philosophy, and they're trying to incorporate that into their curriculum because they recognize that a lot of their students that they're producing over there are just kind of like information vessels. They can't really apply it in creative new ways and things. And I think the United States is getting to the point where we're doing neither in a lot of cases. We're not teaching kids to memorize very well, and then we're also not teaching kids to think critically very well. And I don't know. I mean, there are still really good schools out there, but generally they have to be, you know, you have to be in an area of the country that has good schools, or you have to pay an arm and a leg to go to a good school, and that's just unacceptable. But I mean, there was one guy that Indiana doesn't have that great of school systems at all. And there was one guy who couldn't even read his diploma after he graduated from like high school. He didn't know a lot of the more fancy words on the diploma. He didn't know their definition. And so
because they're using old language.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although I would have a criticism for that. Like maybe we shouldn't be using old language. Just
exactly. Yeah.
You know, we don't use the English that was common 400 years ago. We don't use that English. We've updated it a bunch.
Right.
And we keep updating it. We have something called Urban Dictionary.
Yeah.
You know,
that's so funny to look through and see what kind of funny.
I have to use it a lot, man.
Yeah, I have to use it a lot too, but sometimes you have to weed out the ones where they're just making jokes. That's the problem.
Oh,
I see that a lot, where there's like not a legitimate definition, and then you get people on there that like just make up their own definitions, basically.
Yeah. Well,
all right. Well, I better.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, well, you still have to think for yourself and understand what the word means based on the shit that you see, the supposed definitions. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you see 9 people saying one thing and one guy saying something else, probably that one guy is the one who's lying.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Until
All right.
his
Well, that was
definition
good.
becomes the All right.
Yeah,
Nice
that
talking to
was
you.
good.
I'll see you in 2 weeks, I guess. Or well, no, this Sunday I'll see you.
Yeah. For chaos.
Yeah.
Okay,
Have a
man.
good one.
Take it easy.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.